Lee Stern has seen it all in his career, the highs of great markets and the lows of market scandal. After completing his military service in 1947, Stern enrolled in Roosevelt College and then found his way to the Chicago Board of Trade that year after answering an ad for a runner's job on the floor. From there, he began what has been a 65-year career as a trader, broker, and member at the CBOT. Stern recalls the thrill of making his first spread trade and then the low point in 1992 when a customer schemed to manipulate the bond market and he lost $9 million. That event led to a brief suspension and his firm's eventual exit as a clearing member firm. And if trading was his first love, his second is certainly professional sports. As the founder and owner of the Chicago Sting soccer team in 1974, and then as part owner of the Chicago White Sox since 1976. John Lothian News presents the story of a career that has spanned more than 6 decades and counting. How did you get your start in trading?
When I got out of service, I was in the Army Air Corps, got out in 1947, and Roosevelt College was just opening up at that time on Michigan Avenue. I decided I'd take late classes so I could go out, sleep late, go out as a young guy, And we got $75 a month from the government when you went to school. They paid for the GI Bill of Rights, they paid for all your tuitions. The only reason that I got the job as a runner here is because the student lounge was next door to the employment there, the Employment Bureau. And I happened to see a sign, wanted runners at the Board of Trade, 9:15 to 1:30, $25 a week. And my classes started at 10 to 2. And one day Herman Gordon came to me, this is after I'd been a member maybe a year or so, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just trading the job." He said, "Well, I think I need some help. Would you like to help me?" So that's how I really got started. But I remember how I ended up being a spreader. He gave me an order one day, Herman. He gave me an order to spread some beans. And the spread was, let's say, a 2-cent spread, buy no and sell July. Or buy no and sell January. And it wasn't at the market. It was just fixed, and it wasn't there. It was maybe a half a cent away. All of a sudden, the market moved, and that spread got out of line, and I was able to fill the order. So I filled the order, let's say at 2 cents, and went right back to 1.5. And I handed it to Herman Gordon to give to his customer. He says, "What'd you do here?" He said, "That spread's 1.5. I said, "Well, I guess I must have caught the market out of line." He says, "Good going." And that's how I learned to spread.
Who helped you when you first started out?
Herman Gordon, who was Merrill Lynch's head broker down there, kind of took a liking to me. In those days, you needed to be sponsored for $10,000. You had to have $10,000 in addition to the cost of the membership. And the membership was $2,500 at the time, plus a transfer fee of $250. Well, I had that money as a result of my mother and loaning me some money. She was a buyer at the fair store, millinery buyer. And I remember going down on a floor and being advised I didn't have an account. John McCarthy was the past president of the Board of Trade. And a couple of people said to me, "Why don't you talk to John McCarthy? Tell him I sent you over." I said, "I only have $500. You know what he said to me? "If you have more, you may lose it, son." And he really backed me in the very, very beginning. But you needed this $10,000 guarantee. And I was guaranteed Howard Hinman, who was a floor manager for Merrill Lynch, was nice enough to be one of the co-sponsors. A fellow by the name of Stubby Sachs was the other. Only Stubby had a problem. He'd had a bad losing streak. So a fellow by the name of Milt Kirschbaum, who was with Hutton and a very successful trader, he guaranteed Stubby to guarantee me. And that's the way I got started.
How has spread trading changed over the years?
When I started down here, long-term capital gains, if one put a spread on and bought March and sold May as an example, the long-term capital gain, if the market went up, it'd have to go up, obviously. The March, where you would have a profit on the long side, you only paid on half of that, on 50%. Whereas on the short side, which you had the loss, you took 100% loss. So conceivably, you had even though it was an even situation, you had a net loss on the situation. So that if you'd made trading, let's say you made $50,000 over the course of the year trading, you didn't have to pay any taxes. That got changed. I think it got changed probably around 1950 or so. Once that got knocked out, now you had to take another look at how you're going to spread. Because at that point in time, huge amounts of spread going. What was huge amounts of spread was going on. And once the tax laws changed, that disappeared. And there were other issues going on in the government go back several times when the tax laws changed, and you had to adjust with those things.
What is the best lesson you learned in trading?
Trade what your pocketbook can afford. And I think that's the secret to successful trading. Don't overtrade. That's the same thing. And I trade stocks a lot. I never trade stocks on margin. I'd always trade at cash because and this is just me, when you start to trade on margin or when you start to overtrade beyond your pocketbook, you're going to be a loser. Get yourself down to sleeping positions so that if you've overtraded if you can't sleep. I think that's maybe simplifying it, but I look at it that way.
What was your best trade?
When the soybean oil scandal hit, and there had to be big liquidations. And I was told, you ought to be in the soybean oil pit because they're going to be liquidating, and the markets are going to be going way out of line. And that one day, they were liquidating the position in March, let's say March soybean oil. And you were able to buy the March soybean oil and sell the Jan soybean oil at big, big discounts, simply because they were buying in Jan, commercial buying all the time in Jan, but there was nobody there to take the March except maybe a half a dozen of us. So I bought the March and sold the Jan, and the next day the liquidation came in the January. Now you're able to buy the Jan back, and all the commercial buying was in the March. And I always remember that was one of my better trades, I think.
What was your worst trade?
I guess the worst trade was the Chernobyl situation where I had a large option position. I thought it was the end because I think everybody thought we had a major problem. We heard the winds were blowing towards Norway and Sweden, and they were all over. And that was very costly. And I was short wheat at the time. While beans opened up the limit, wheat opened unchanged. And I went over and bought my wheat in. They eventually closed the limit up. Eventually, of course, the markets turned around, and Chernobyl wasn't the disaster that we thought it was going to be.
Tell us about the bond scandal in 1992.
There was a young man who was a trader who wanted to open up an account here. He was trading it through another company, another house. He just wanted to open up a small account. He put up $25,000, $50,000, I think, to open an account. Meanwhile, it turns out that he had a friend of his who was his assistant, who was just buying a membership in the Board of Trade. So this other fellow had a membership in the Board of Trade. So now you got one trading through Goldenberg Haymeyer and one trading through me. He and his friend ended up scheming. His brother, who was in New York, and another friend brought him onto the floor, and he had told the broker, the fellow I'm talking about, told the brokers that he had some big customers, and could they handle these huge accounts? They said, sure. Nobody contacted Stern & Company. On my way to Florida, October 22nd, 1992. It's the day that we had just opened our new house. So I was on the airplane with my wife, and at that time you didn't have any phones on the airplane. So I got off the airplane, and I called the office, and Ann Tully, who was my secretary for many, many years, I didn't like the way she sounded. She says, well, you better talk to Danny. So I talked to one of my sons, And he says, we got a serious problem. And I said, well, what is it? He says, well, somebody sold, I'm not exaggerating, 10,000 bonds, 50,000, 100,000 bonds. I says, what's going on? He says, we're out of the trade. I says, well, what did it cost? He said, many millions of dollars. There was a loss with the customer that I had of about 12 million, and a profit by his associate who had bought the puts and sold them out for about 3 million. So that offset the loss. The two ended up going to jail for 41 months. They were both found guilty, federal crimes. We filed with the committee to get my money from these brokers that handled these orders. First of all, the fellow that had the membership didn't have a full membership. He just had an options membership. And they were taking the orders from the options pit and filling the orders in a regular futures pit, which was illegal. The end result really was, I think, if I remember correctly, about $9 million with the tax able to deduct that off of tax, and the loss was probably somewhere around $6 million. I was really down because obviously it was a major blow, financial blow to me and my family. I was a member of the clearing member over at the Merck, and I called the Merck up there. No problem with the Merck. I called up and canceled our clearing privilege, no more. And I came about a week later. It was the 25th anniversary of my membership, and there were about a half a dozen of them. They were giving out pins at the Merck. And I'll never forget this. I got a call from Jack Sander. Come over, come. I said, Jack, I can't. I'm just absolutely beat. You got to come over. My family said, Dad, go over there. I said, I just don't feel like doing it. Go over. It'll be better for you. So I go over there, and I'm sitting down. There's, I think, Tom Gilderman and O'Connor. And there are about half a dozen of us getting these pins. And all of the directors and officers of the CME are sitting up at the table, and they call my name. And when they call my name, I start to get up. Every one of those directors, and I got tears when I still think of it, every one of those directors, officers, Leo Malama, all of them came down and hugged me. And I'll never forget that. It so happened that the following year of the bond fiasco, 1993, and the following year of the silver fiasco, for me, anyhow, would have been about 1980, I guess, 1980. Both those years were the best years I ever had trading in the pit. And not because I tried to get the money back, just because the markets were there and I was able to trade and have the best years that I ever had at the Chicago Board of Trading. It was a miracle.
How did you get into owning a professional soccer team in Chicago, the Sting?
Well, as far as soccer was concerned, I knew nothing about the sport. In fact, I didn't like it, didn't understand it, didn't like it. And in 1970, I think it was about 74, 75, and around that time, I ended up buying a franchise for $200,000 in the North American Soccer League. Owning the franchise at that time was like owning a yacht. It wasn't the cost, it's the upkeep. And fortunately, we had these great soybean markets were just getting started, and I was able to afford keeping this thing alive for all those years.
How did you become a part owner in the Chicago White Sox in 1976?
One of the members of our club was a good friend of Bill Veck's, and Bill Veck was in financial trouble, not trouble, but had a financial problem if he wanted to keep the team in Chicago and put the team in Chicago. And I was asked by this fellow who belonged to our club, would I be interested in investing? And I said, yeah. I said, what? I said, well, not that kind of money. Needed about $1.2 million or $1.3 million to keep the team in Chicago. So I got a hold of Rich Dennis and Harvey Yannick and Freddie Brzezowski. And we all put up $300,000 apiece. And we owned 20% of the White Sox. And that kept the White Sox in Chicago. Somebody else some company put up $200,000 and decided to make that sound like a big promotion thing for their company. And he got the credit, their company got the credit for keeping the White Sox here. But we kept it here.